I'm from Russia, so please pardon my grammar. I'm so confused and looking for answers. I have posted this many times on Russian supernatural forums, but still haven't found any clues. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 11-ish at the time. Me and my parents lived in a relatively large city in Ural. The city is famous for its massive industrial complex and polluted air, which is particularly evident in summer. So every year my parents would send me on a visit to my grandpa in Siberia for 2 or 3 weeks so that I could breathe some fresh air. Even though it meant that I would spend some of the sweet summer days away from my friends, I always eagerly awaited these trips. Thing is, my grandpa was one of the most interesting people I've met to this day. He was an archaeologist and specialized in Slavic mythology and rituals. Aside from the fact that he was obviously very knowledgeable in history and culture, he traveled the whole country and had the most entertaining stories from his expeditions. He was like a real-life Indiana Jones to me. 20 years ago his team discovered a massive network of ancient villages in Siberia, so they built a permanent research camp with all the facilities. They even had showers and electricity. Junior staff members lived in tents and temporary buildings, and academic officers like my grandpa had wooden cottages. It was a remote, very isolated location, so the route to the camp was not an easy one. That year my dad and grandpa agreed that dad would drive me to a small Siberian town in his car, where grandpa would pick me up. After 10 hours of driving, I was sleeping most of the time. We met up with grandpa at the arranged location. We went to a local buffet where dad and grandpa exchanged the latest news. Then grandpa said to me, "Well, pioneer, time for us to hit the road." Dad went back to his car to have a nap before driving home, and we headed to a river pier, where my grandpa's colleague waited for us in a boat. "Let me introduce you," grandpa said. "This is my grandson, he is a very smart lad. And this is Stepan Petrovich, who specializes in ritual burials. This spring we discovered an amazing mound on the bank of the river, 1 hour away from our camp. A very untypical one, too, so Stepan Petrovich is helping us make sense of it." I gave Stepan Petrovich a polite nod, to which he responded, "What are you, a girl?" Men shake hands. He had a very firm handshake. I had mixed feelings about Stepan Petrovich. He seemed a little gruff, and to be honest I was a little afraid of him and wished he wasn't with us. But then he and grandpa started exchanging stories and anecdotes, and I realized that he was a fun guy, just a little rough around the edges. I even started to tell him my school stories, like when we pranked our teacher by covering the chalkboard in wax, and he seemed to like them. After 2 hours of sailing, we finally arrived. A spectacular landscape opened before my eyes, a huge mound right on the bank of the river. It looked so monumental and fearsome in the setting sun. I would think that I traveled back in time, if not for the researchers' tent surrounding the hill. "There it is, magnificent, isn't it?" my grandpa said. One of the staff members helped us park the boat, greeted me, then addressed my grandpa, "Valentin Bogdanovich, we need you to take a look at something before the shift ends." "Sure, just a moment," he replied. "Stepan Petrovich, will you please show our young fella around? I'll be right back," and we all will head to our camp. So we went on a little tour with Stepan Petrovich. "Your grandpa is a great researcher, so I assume you know some basics about the culture of ancient Slavs. This burial we have here is a very large one. Usually, collective burials are associated with military clashes. They contain remains of fallen warriors. Well, it's not the case here. Looks like an entire village of peaceful serfs was pillaged by a forest fire, but we also consider the possibility of a mass offering. The corpses are burnt but not cremated, which is not typical. What is even more unusual, instead of regular ritual weapons there are iron sickles, one per body. Some militant cult might have raided the village and made a mass sacrifice." He made a spooky face. Usually, scary stories didn't impress me much, but the atmosphere of a Siberian summer night did the job. I felt uneasy. Soon my grandpa came back and we were on our way to the camp. The camp was at the edge of a forest, about 1 hour away from the river, separated from it by an enormous field of wild rye. "Grandpa," I said, "if this village was pillaged by a militant cult, is it theoretically possible that their successors are still hiding out there in the forest?" Grandpa gave Stepan Petrovich a condemning glare. "You old bandit, how dare you to scare a child?" Stepan Petrovich responded with a guilty look. "Sorry, Professor, I'm just not used to being around children. I'll watch what I say." We arrived at the camp. After 10 hours of resting in my father's car, I didn't feel sleepy at all, so my grandpa decided to throw a little party to celebrate my arrival. Me, Grandpa, Stepan Petrovich, and a few staff members gathered around the campfire. I felt a lot more relaxed in a large group, so I suggested a contest for the scariest story. "Well, we are scientists who study mythology, so it would not be easy to beat us," Grandpa chuckled. "By the way, do you know why people come up with scary stories? You see, we are a lot smarter than animals, which makes us both powerful and vulnerable. Our perception of reality is so acute, it would be insufferable for us to cope with all the bad things that can happen, if not for our ability to come up with explanations. For example, our ancestors really liked saunas, but even something as fun and relaxing as bathing can be dangerous. A person could overheat and have a cardiac attack or something. Ancient Slavs had a strict set of rules when it came to bathing. First of all, you must never go to a sauna alone. Second, you must not fall asleep in a sauna. And most importantly, never bathe after the sunset. All these rules make sense if you think about them rationally, because violating them could result in a fatal accident. But our ancestors came up with another explanation. They believed there was a demon who came to those who broke the rules. The demon kissed them and exhaled hot air into their lungs, killing them. This is the power of the collective unconscious. These rules really do make sense if you think about them, I replied. And I can understand where this legend is coming from. But why does the demon only come after midnight? Why do all bad things and scary stories always happen after midnight? Well, nights are dangerous because our perception is not that good. Even ordinary things can appear scary in the darkness. But our ancestors believed that midnight was not the only dangerous time of the day. There were 4 borderline times when the line between the natural world and the spirit world blurs: midnight, sunrise, sunset, and midday. Did I ever tell you about the Midday Lady? The Midday Lady is the spiritual manifestation of a hot day, when it is too dangerous to work in the fields, because of potential sunstrokes. During that time of the day, serfs would shut down any field works and go back home to wait out the midday. If you stay in the field, or even worse, if you fall asleep there, the Midday Lady would kill you. The following few days in the camp were nothing but entertaining. I didn't feel worried even though we were stranded in a Siberian forest near an ancient burial. Being surrounded by rationally thinking adults focused on their work had a relaxing effect on me. Most of the time we were in the camp. Grandpa worked for 5 to 6 hours every day, and I spent this time exploring his amazing library. Then we would dine with other researchers and go on a little hike around the camp. Every other day we went to the excavations. Grandpa supervised the works, while some of the junior staff members entertained me with their recent discoveries under a strict condition that I'm not allowed to touch anything. There were ancient tools, household items, even some remnants of traditional clothing. In the evenings we would sit around the campfire and tell stories. I was having a good time. Something strange happened on day 5 or 6. Me, my grandpa, and most of the crew went to the mound that day, and 2 people stayed to look after the camp. When we came back they told us about the incident. They were on the side of the camp nearest to the forest when they heard the sound of breaking glass. They rushed to the other side to see what happened, and soon enough they noticed that a few houses had broken windows, all on the side that was facing the field. This scared the hell out of me. I seriously believed that the dead were disturbed by the excavations and were warning us. Grandpa reassured me that cheap glass probably collapsed because of hot weather. Contrary to popular belief, summers in Siberia can actually be pretty hot, and this particular summer was unusually hot. Just in case these were some hooligans or wild animals, Stepan Petrovich suggested having more people look after the camp. This never happened again, and I almost forgot about it. The real incident happened 4 days before I left. It was a bright, extremely hot, windless day. Grandpa finished his work on the excavations early, and we were rushing to the camp to be on time for lunch. I said see you there to other staff members, took my backpack and we headed to the camp. 5 minutes later we heard one of the staff members calling my grandpa out loud. He said probably something important, go to the camp, I'll catch up, and headed back to the excavations. It was 20 minutes later, right when I was in the middle of the field, when I felt something strange. It was like the wind, but not quite. It is hard to explain, but it felt like a moving field of static electricity. The weeds in the field didn't move and it was dead silent, but I felt an invisible wave move and touch me. And then I got the feeling that I will never forget. Out of nowhere, I suddenly clearly realized that I'm dying. I couldn't breathe, time froze, my heart was beating fast. I tried to calm myself. I said to myself, just relax, this is probably just a panic attack from being alone in this ominous setting. But it didn't help a bit, I knew it was a lie. I'm dying, just like that, without any apparent reason, and no one will find me in these tall weeds. And then I saw her. First I saw a shining orb of light moving towards me from the other side of the field, very rapidly. For some reason, I immediately understood, the moment it reaches me, I die. I tried to breathe, I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. When the orb got closer I started to see a silhouette. It looked like a person, but it didn't walk, it didn't even fly, it kind of just teleported through space. It moved really strange, like a thunderbolt. I know this sounds weird, but I'm trying to describe it precisely. 5 meters away from me it stopped. It looked like a young woman, blonde and very pale. She was naked and held a sickle in her hand. And she was so beautiful, she was painful to look at. I even thought, now I'm ready to die, I will never ever see anything as beautiful. She didn't look angry or hostile, more like curious, but there was something off about her. In a moment I realized, she didn't have pupils. Her eyes were just all white. It was a strange feeling, I was scared, I didn't want to die, she was an obviously evil creature, but the very idea that she would go away plunged me into despair. The next thing I remember is I heard some noise, some regular, earthly noise, perhaps from moving weeds. She turned her head in the direction of the noise and started to move there. I blacked out. I awakened with a very severe headache, and my body felt like a stuffed toy. At first, I didn't understand where I am. I was still in the field, but now the sun was setting. I felt lost, like I woke up from the most wonderful dream, and at the same time, I felt relief from escaping certain death. I didn't know what to do, but I wanted to shake this feeling off, and I wanted to be around people. So I forced myself to get up. I saw a dark silhouette in the distance and thought that it was probably my grandpa searching for me. I was too exhausted to fear anything anymore, so I headed in that direction. It was my grandpa. I called him, but he didn't respond or move. He was doing something strange. It looked like he was dancing, or more like having a stroke. His whole body was shaking, and he kept mumbling something inaudible. As I approached him, I started to discern something above his head. It was like a swirling cloud of concentrated darkness, some black mist, floating 2 meters above my grandpa's head. Then I heard the noises of the approaching crowd and saw some flashlights in the distance. The cloud melted and disappeared, and Grandpa fell to the ground. It was a group from the camp. They were very worried. They picked up my grandpa and rushed to the camp. They talked about how hard it would be to get an ambulance here. A nurse in our camp examined Grandpa and concluded that it was sunstroke. For some reason, I didn't tell them anything about what I've seen. It might sound odd, but I didn't want anyone to know about the lady in the field. Grandpa regained consciousness in a couple of hours. He looked very confused, didn't recognize people, and couldn't explain what happened. He fully recovered by the next morning, but he changed. Most of the time he was as fun and kind as usual, but from time to time he kind of froze and just looked into the void for a few minutes. When I tried to ask him if something was wrong, he didn't respond, just gave me a very grim look. It was nothing like him. He honestly looked as though he could kill me. It was dreadful. And then he just went back to normal, made jokes, and told funny stories. One time I asked him carefully if he remembers what happened in the field. He got very annoyed and said that I'm a grown-up now, and I shouldn't be afraid of some supernatural bullshit. We both just had sunstroke in the field, and that's it. I never asked him about it again. In 2 days I departed. Grandpa gave me a hug, wished me luck in school, and said that he would see me on the winter holidays. I was happy to see you, Pioneer, he said. He didn't come for the winter holidays. As my father told me, he doesn't feel like being around people right now. I'm recalling the words of my grandpa now. Our perception of reality is so acute, it would be insufferable for us to cope with all the bad things that can happen, if not for our ability to come up with explanations. I wonder if I was a kid who made up this story to help me cope with Grandpa's sudden change and quick death. Or maybe it's the opposite, and I'm trying to pretend that he died of natural causes, and I never saw what I saw. I changed too, not as much as my grandpa, but something is wrong with me. Sometimes I feel like I can't experience happiness and beauty the way other people do. I just wish I could see her again, for a brief moment. The following summer was the first time I had mixed feelings about visiting Grandpa. I was even going to tell my parents that I'd rather go to a summer camp with my friends this year. But I didn't have to do it. In June, Grandpa died. He decided to take a midday nap and had a cardiac attack. When I was 16, my father told me that there was in fact a criminal investigation of his death due to suspicious circumstances. A few windows of his house were broken, as though someone broke in. That is all for this story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.